Welcome to Believe It or Not, an interfaith Grand River program. I'm your host, August Edelman, and I'm joined today by Neil Arya, who's of the Hindu faith. Thanks so much for being on the show, Neil.
Well, thank you, August. Good to see you again.
Good to see you too. Tell me a bit about yourself. Who are you out in the world?
Well, now people are known by their professions, so I'm a family doctor, but semi-retired.
Mm.
I was born in India. I was 38 days old when we moved from India to Canada. Didn't move alone, moved with my parents. My father was a school teacher, and it took us through small towns all across the country. So we started off in BC for a couple of years, a year in Saskatchewan, and then largely in the Wyerton Owen Sound area.
Mm-hmm.
So I consider myself more of a small town type of person. Went off to university, studied engineering in Toronto, medicine in Kingston, and then did my family medicine residency in Montreal. And
Wow.
My parents moved from Owen Sound while I was doing my residency, and I came back here for a few months to Kitchener, where I thought I'd last maybe a year, and 30 plus years later, I'm still here. I started a refugee clinic in 2008. I am an adjunct professor at 4 universities, Laurier, Waterloo, Western, and McMaster. What else? There's an NGO now, charity that we started called the Pegasus Institute, which works on issues of peace, global health, and sustainability. So I was one of the founders and the president of the organization.
Holy moly. Okay, so let me take a step back. So you said that the refugee clinic.
Mm-hmm.
What is that? How does that work?
Okay, so in 2008, Reception House, Waterloo Region, which is responsible for government-assisted refugees when they first came here, they told me they were having a lot of trouble with health care and getting family doctors for their clients, and that took up more than half of their time. So they asked if I might be able to help in some way. And one thing led to another, and we started a clinic that was initially a day a week with just me and an RPN working. And then after the Syrian influx, things became much more challenging, and we expanded our operations and expanded from being a clinic that only saw people for a few months to now more than 2 years.
Wow. That's extraordinary. Because, yeah, I mean, you hear even from people who have lived there their whole lives and know how the system works more or less, like it can be so hard to find a doctor and develop that kind of continuity of care. Like, what a brilliant idea.
Yeah, well, it was more that family doctors were uncomfortable dealing with newcomers who would come with issues that they were unfamiliar with.
Mm-hmm.
They'd have language and cultural barriers.
Right.
And so we were meant to help with transitioning.
That's incredible. That's incredible. And the other thing you mentioned was Pegasus.
Yes.
So tell me more about that.
So Pegasus began as a series of conferences in 2014, and so it was going to be every 2 years. We were going to have one in 2020 in Waterloo. The other ones had been in Toronto, and then that got kiboshed about a month before we were due to have the conference. And then people felt that working on these issues and having people who were researchers, people who were advocates or activists, educators, students, getting them all together would be good. And so we formed the Institute. We are a more global institute, even though like our headquarters are supposed to be here. And we have a Latin American network, a Francophone network concentrating on Francophone Africa, an East African network, and a student network. And then we're engaged in some research, a little bit in East Africa, and some stuff on peace professionalism. We have various webinars for each of our networks. We have courses. We had courses with McGill on peace through health, environment and global health, and migration and global health. We did the latter two. The environmental health course was also done in French 1 year. The migration course also in Spanish.
Wow.
So a lot of interesting things. So it's very fulfilling.
That sounds so interesting.
Yeah.
I also do the IGR website, so I'm like, oh, I want to get on your mailing list or something so I can put stuff on there. That's so interesting. You must be a very busy person.
Well, somewhat. And now I'm just working a day a week clinically in Brantford, trying to help set up a refugee clinic for them too.
Oh, that's great, because they have quite a burgeoning population there.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. They have as many refugees there as we had when we started in terms of
Really?
on an annual basis. Yeah.
I didn't know it had grown that much.
Yeah.
Wow. That's incredible. I think one of the things that I've gotten to appreciate so much doing these interviews and being part of IGR is like, you think you kind of vaguely know what's out there in terms of like the work nonprofits are doing. And you think, oh, yeah, people help homeless folks and people do food stuff. And, but you get to hear about these projects that people have, set up or dedicated their whole lives to, or even just, got up and running. And it's just like, you wouldn't even necessarily think that, you wouldn't think of it off the top of your head, but it's so important and it keeps other stuff running.
Yeah. And I would say that really for faith, since this is more about faith, I think having something that's more engaged with the world. And so before we had our clinic for a few years, I was the doctor for St. John's Kitchen, psychiatric outreach program, and working on homeless health guidelines. So I definitely see faith as working within communities.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a brilliant transition to my next question,
Okay.
which is tell me a little bit about your faith background and your tradition.
Well, that's it's simple in one sense. I think it's not really explicit and wasn't when I was growing up. My father he was educated at something called a gurukul, so a religious boarding school for Hindus, and it was for a reformist sect of Hinduism called the Arya Samaj, and so they were against things with the caste system. The name Arya is more like Sikhs have Singh,
Right.
and so it's more so people can't tell your caste, and so they were against the dowry and bride burning and all these other things that were considered corruptions of Hinduism. But by bride burning, I mean just any woman going into a funeral pyre after her husband died. So there were many things that they considered corruptions of classical Hinduism. So my father was part of this faith, but we didn't really have a place to go to growing up in small town Canada. And so he would do prayers before he went off to teach and before meals. My mother occasionally might have a little place of meditation in a closet, but not all the time, and she'd pray with my father too, but the prayers were in Sanskrit, so I didn't even understand what he was speaking about, and I didn't really engage so much. First went to India when I was 7, and we would sometimes go to things. I'd see my uncle doing daily prayers in front of a sacred fire, but didn't engage so much myself in any of this. And so it was more passive in terms of what I got to know about the faith. And then when I was a teenager, my father's brother-in-law, who had been more like his father because his father died when he was younger, he came to visit in Canada, and he asked Dad, why aren't you doing anything for the faith of people here? And so they started more of a Hindu prayer group in Grey Bruce. They just hold that at somebody's house. And it was actually quite interfaith itself. And we would have people of South Asian origin, but Muslims, Christians, and others coming sometimes to those prayers, but often just for lunch after.
Yeah.
So it was meant as a social thing once a month. That was my general exposure to things. But even as a child, I probably was more exposed to Christianity. And we did the Lord's Prayer in school.
Oh my gosh!
And I would stand during that. At first, I would actually be saying that. Sometimes I didn't. I went to churches, to Sunday school with friends at different times. I did read the Bible, and we actually had books of many faiths at home. So I would read different things, the Old Testament and the Torah and the New Testament. And I was actually disappointed when they gave these little Bibles out in school when I was in about grade 4, and then they didn't have enough, and then they said, well, you don't need one. And I said, no, I wanted one. And anyway, I was very interested, particularly in Christianity. I went as a medical student to Mother Teresa's Center in Delhi, not in Calcutta. And my wife is Catholic, and so we go to church quite often. She's done a lot of things overseas with different Catholic groups. I trained at the Jewish General in Montreal, so for my family medicine residency, and got to know a little bit more about Judaism at the time, but it had an interest even prior. Did a medical elective in Tanzania and stayed with a Muslim family.
Wow.
And learned about their traditions. I have most of our refugees actually tend to be from Muslim countries, so see them. And ironically, my parents were both refugees from what became Pakistan.
Right.
So as Hindus in the majority Muslim area, and they were forced to flee because of that. But in the end, I've had a lot more friends who are Muslim in that way.
So you've really been doing like the DIY interfaith kind of building.
Well, in some ways, yeah. I think I've always had an interest that way.
That's really remarkable. So within all of those and within the traditions that you practice and your loved ones practice, are there particular ideas or concepts that you just like really hold close to your heart?
Yeah, that again is a bit of a challenge to describe. So Hindus consider Hinduism a way of life. And in classical times, there wasn't anything with a specific book or a specific set of rules that one had to adhere to. There are these epic poems that you may have heard of, the Mahabharata and Ramayana, and the Gita is part of the Mahabharata, where you have stories. Some people take those more literally in terms of as God come on earth, but that wasn't my tradition. I mentioned different things in terms of being against the caste system and dowry. The Arya Samaj is more monotheistic, but Hindus can believe in no God, one God, or many gods, and still consider themselves to be Hindu. I think most people would say that Dharma or the way or law might be a way of guiding us, but even that's just more leading to more what we would consider virtuous behavior, fulfilling your duty, whether it be a professional duty, duty to family, duty to worship God or studying these books. The Vedas, which you might have heard of, the Vedas are the book of knowledge, and there are different types of knowledge, and that includes medical knowledge and other things. So reading that often is a guiding way for Hindus. But I think that really the values in terms of honesty, ahimsa, or not injuring others, as was very important to Gandhi. They talk about purity, goodwill, mercy, patience, forbearance, self-restraint, generosity, And so all of those are just general things, not really meant in a sectarian way. As I was reading in preparation for this, I heard about the 5 yamas and the 5 niyamas. The 5 yamas are supposed to be truth, nonviolence, celibacy, non-stealing, non-possessiveness, and the 5 niyamas are supposed to be cleanliness, contentment, scriptural study, austerity, and regular prayers. And so I think in general that would probably be something that most people would adhere to. Otherwise, for me, I think that peace has been a major part of things, and that's why I got in different NGOs. The Golden Rule. My wife had been with Scarborough Foreign Missions for 3 years, and so thinking about that in various religions, I think that the Interfaith Group is seeing that. So I think doing unto others as we would have them do unto us is important. Others talk about different tenets in terms of truth being eternal, Brahma being truth and reality. There's a Hindu type of trinity, Brahma, Vishnu, Shiv, with the creator being Brahma, and then Vishnu being the preserver, and Shiv being the destroyer. And in the Hindu way, the destroyer isn't necessarily a negative thing. But anyway, Brahma is the truth and reality. The Vedas, some say, are the ultimate authority. But again, this is a large book. And everyone should try to achieve this dharma, or the way. Souls are considered immortal, and we're going through life, and our goal is to achieve moksha, or escape the cycle of rebirths for those who believe in rebirths. So I think that's a lot of information in a short time.
That's great, though. I feel like a lot of people, including myself, don't really know much at all about Hinduism, besides like kind of what you pick up in pop culture, which is probably kind of dodgy.
Yeah, it is. And so, like, if we think about yoga, for instance, people think about yoga being exercises. Shiv, whom you'll speak to later, will talk about a particular type of breathing that would also be considered a part of things. But so those would be like in terms of mental in terms of mental control. That would include meditation types of things that are meant to calm the mind, that they call Raja Yoga. But there's also other types of yoga, like Karma Yoga or Karma Yoga, in terms of right actions. And people have used the term karma popularly in terms of our actions have consequences, maybe not in this life, but in future lives, but essentially meant to give people lessons to act right. Bhakti Yoga is in terms of devotion and prayer and finding God in all things. So people will talk about God in an idol, but it's more a representation of God in all things. Or Jnana Yoga, which is more in terms of knowledge or analysis and trying to see God through contemplation.
Has there been a time in your life when your faith has been a challenge for you?
Not exactly. Although when I was a teenager, I had fairly severe asthma, and I was hospitalized a few times. So one time when I was going in to hospital, they asked me what my religion was. And I said, I don't have a religion. And my mother, who was with me, was horrified. And she said, like, how can you say that? I'm disowning you as my son. I'm not going to see you in hospital. And then she said she went to my father, and my father just took that very calmly, and that was fine. Yeah, he's just expressing himself. And I survived my asthma attack, but it was, but that wasn't really a crisis of faith for me. And I wouldn't say that my belief system has really changed a lot since that time as a teenager,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm more comfortable calling myself a Hindu.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have necessarily wanted to do that because I do think about a label as possibly being exclusionary, or at least I thought about it that way, and now I see it just as a way of representing myself and being part of community.
Mm-hmm. You know, you talked about being in these small towns where maybe your parents were really kind of the only folks you were seeing practicing their tradition.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of community do you have now in terms of your faith, identity, and what does that community mean to you, if anything? What does it do?
Yeah, I think Hinduism is much more of a personal thing for us. I know for my mother, going to the temple very regularly, and there's several temples in the area, but she finds that very meaningful in terms of the praying and contemplating together, but also the sharing of food and other things. For me, I will go occasionally, but not extremely regularly. I've been part of yoga classes and Sanskrit too. I've wanted to learn from others within the temple, and we have a lot of friends who are part of that, so we'll go on special occasions. But I'm not a person who would go once a week or more often.
And I think it's important to hear that, like, you can still have that identity and be part of a culture and a place and a community, and not be there all the time, and that's okay. And like that's a valid way of living your identity. Yeah. So I guess my last question is sort of very broad, which is basically, is there something that you want to talk about that's sort of a thing you're passionate about or really wanted to share today that you wanted to get out?
I do think that the devaluation of faith in society that's occurred in my lifetime has been quite dramatic. And that I do find a pity, because I think a lot of people dismiss this without really considering that. There are many things in which faith has led people in a very not positive way, but I think that when people nowadays look at that, they often are ready to throw out the baby with the bathwater.
Yeah.
And so that I find a little bit sad.
Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah. Well, Neil, thank you so much for being on the show.
Okay.
It's been a real pleasure talking with you.
Okay, likewise.
And we'll see you next time on Believe It or Not.